Welcome to Framing with an iPhone. We'll be covering how to frame both photos and videos using the grid on your iPhone. If you don't have the grid already turned on, commonly known as the rule of thirds grid, go to your settings, then camera, and then flick the switch on grid. You're going to get this 9 squared grid on your camera app afterwards. This is going to help you to frame any photo or video that you take, and we'll talk through how that works now. Here's a ridiculous selfie of me, and the reason why I wanted to show this photo is to demonstrate how you can use the rule of thirds grid even in selfies. So in this case, with the rule of thirds grid, I've lined up the top line, which is here, with my eyes. And this is probably one of my favorite things to do with the grid, is to use the top line to line up with a person's eyes. It doesn't always have to be exactly on the eyes, but getting pretty close usually helps an image look beautiful. So this is going to apply whether you're taking a photograph or if you're doing a live stream video where you're talking directly into the camera. It is totally possible, especially if you're trying to show off real estate, if you want to be to one side, to use this point, for example, to be on one of your eyes while leaving this large area open to show off a property, and vice versa. My shoulders also happen to be lined up here, but that might just be a nice coincidence. To practice this position and using the grid, pick up your phone, hold it far out, lift your arm up about 30 degrees. Doesn't have to be exact, but just lift it up a little bit, maybe 6 inches, maybe 8 inches. And then tilt your phone slightly downwards until that top line of the grid lines up directly with your eyes. Take a photo. Then do what most people normally do and move your face into the middle of the grid and then take another photo. When you have time, either pause the video or check it out afterwards and compare the two photos and see which one you prefer. I would be surprised if the centered one is the one that you like better, but if it is, so be it. This type of framing can be used across all forms of photography and videography. So here are a number of examples of actual McDonald's agents and staff that I've had the pleasure of taking photographs of and use the rule of thirds grid to take their photos. So taking a look at these, just imagine to yourself what I might have been doing. In the first case, I placed the rule of thirds grid a little bit lower than the eyes. However, this top line is directly in line with his shoulders. So it still works. We have 1/3 of the frame greenery and 2/3 body. In most cases though, however, I would prefer if the rule of thirds grid would be closer to the eye line. And in this case, I placed the subject on the left line as well. And I left this area, the remaining 2/3, open with neutral space. So I'm always working with what I want to have a lot of and what I want to leave open. In the same way, I've used the rule of thirds grid on this image. Perhaps if I had done it perfectly, it would have been a little bit higher and we would have lined up the eye perfectly on this point. However, it doesn't have to be perfect. Even getting close is going to look good. Now, you don't have to just use the top line. In these photos, I've used the left line, the right line, and the bottom line. So just take a look at these images and imagine where that line might be. Now that you've had a second, let's take a look. So the image on the left, I've placed the line between the two subjects. And in this case, I consider the agent and the dog actually the two subjects of the photo. So I place a line between them in order to balance it out. The eye line though, however, I still use that favorite top line for myself. And the dog, I just kind of accepted that he would be a little bit off. On the right image, I've done the same thing. Top line in line with the subject, a little high this time. And the line in between, slightly, the main subject, which is the agent, and the second subject, which is the open house sign. Now this bottom one is perhaps the most interesting, the most different. I've employed the use of the bottom thirds line, and I've placed the left line and the right line between the two subjects, getting as symmetrical as possible. There could be an argument to say I could have backed up and maybe put the bottom line exactly on their eyes, maybe zoomed out a little bit, and we could have had more of the image up here. But this is how I took the photo, and again, not everything's perfect. All I want you to think about is how to get close to getting subjects onto these corner points, right? The corners of these squares, if it's the left corner or the right corner, or perhaps using a top line, a right line, a left line, or the bottom line. Framing properties is basically the exact same thing. However, we're going to favor symmetrical framing for properties rather than when photographing or filming people. Take a look at these images again. See if you can imagine where the rule of thirds lines are. And I'll show you those now. So what you can see here is nothing really is lined up perfectly. And oftentimes you're going to find that that's the case, and that's perfectly okay. But what we're going to use is the ceiling line and the floor line. In the same way here, we have a ceiling line and a floor line. What you're going to notice is that the ceiling line has about the same amount of distance to the rule of thirds as the floor line. It's not exact, but it's pretty close. Same thing, we have about the same amount of space there as we do here. So I've got a really nice framing from the ceiling and from the floor to make this feel like a very symmetrical image. The second thing I'm using are, in this case, excuse the lack of a straight line, the walls, and the amount of distance here to here is roughly the same. Not exact, of course, but pretty close. On this image, it's a little bit different. We have an asymmetrical room where the wall's all the way over here. Perhaps the wall is here, and the cabinet. I decided to frame off the cabinet, but an argument could have been made to, actually now that I'm looking at it, I do feel like if we use the actual wall, this is roughly equidistant. So this is a very symmetrical image. Now, when you're shooting video, you're not going to have all this time to set this up. You just want to get it close. Make sure that your phone is perpendicular to the ground. So you want the phone to be straight up and down, roughly 1 foot above the surface. So you can see this left image, we're seeing over the desk. And in this image, we're seeing over the desk again. And then we're going to use the top line and the bottom line to try and get it pretty close. You'll get better at this over time. Don't worry if it's not perfect. Now, you might be walking down a hallway, or you might walk into a room that there's just absolutely no way to make the shot look symmetrical. That's when we need to use the left line and the right line. So, take a look at these images, see where the left line and the right line might be used. Now that you've had a second, I'm going to draw on this one the right line. We have roughly 1/3 here and roughly 2/3 here. In this image, I've used actually the same exact spot, but framed it with 1/3 on the left and 2/3 on the right. You can see here it does not matter if I'm using landscape, which is this sideways version, or portrait, which is this upwards version. Bringing in the rule of thirds square, you can see that I've lined up that same point. On the left image, I've also used the line of the window. If you're not taking photos and you're doing video, you're not going to have time for this. Just worry about the one line. And I could probably go on and talk about these additional lineups, but this is really only going to come into play if you have enough time to set up the photo. With video, again, just focus on a single line for the framing. This is most useful for walking into asymmetrical situations. Put the corner on one of the lines and walk forward. It'll look great. Using some of the images from previous videos. So this is another asymmetrical option on the left and a symmetrical option to some extent on the right. We put the rule of thirds grid over and we can see I've lined up the corner with one of the lines. We have 2/3 in this direction, 1/3 in this direction. I have a bonus point of the wall center on the left. If you don't get that, don't worry. Just focus on at least having this main line lined up with the corner. In the right image, we've lined up the cabinetry or the fridge with the right line. Bonus points for lining up the countertop and the base of the cabinetry with the top and bottom line. Again, don't worry too much about the top and bottom lines. It's nice to get, but pick one line that you're framing off of and really focus on that. Especially when you're live streaming, you're not going to have enough time to think about all of these lines. Hope that was useful. The next video will be on camera movements and stabilization. Please let me know if you have any questions. Thanks.